Dorothea Puente, also known as the Death House Landlady, looked like a kind, innocent grandma on the outside, but underneath her unassuming exterior laid a cold, calculated killer. Her vanity and greed would see her charged with 9 counts of murder after police dug up the remains of 7 bodies from the gardens surrounding her boarding house. Hi, I'm Lostloz, an artist from Wales in the UK. In the interest of levelling up my digital art skills, I decided to create a series of digital portraits of serial killers using Procreate. In each episode, I'll talk about the life and crimes of each of the serial killers while showing you the process of completing their portrait. So, if you love art and find serial killers intriguing, get comfy. Welcome to the first episode of Portrait of a Serial Killer. Dorothea's childhood was far from picturesque. She was born Dorothea Helen Gray in the Redlands in California on the 9th of January 1929. Both her parents were alcoholics and struggled to make ends meet. Her mother was a sex worker and would often bring clients back to the family home. Physical and emotional abuse was commonplace in the household as well, and the father had a history of suicide attempts and would often threaten to kill himself in front of his children. The father would die of tuberculosis in 1937, and her mother died the following year in a motorcycle accident. This meant that Puente was orphaned at the age of 9, resulting in her and her siblings being placed in foster care, where she was reportedly sexually abused. At the age of 16, Puente was a sex worker. As she got older, she moved on to committing theft and fraud. She would end up doing 4 months in prison in 1948 for forging checks to buy clothes and accessories. She did 90 days of jail time in 1960 for operating a brothel in Sacramento. In her earlier years, Puente had gotten married and divorced twice. She had children from her first husband, one she put up for adoption, and the second she gave to family members to raise. She developed a drinking and gambling habit following the divorce of her first husband. In 1961, at the age of 32, she was committed to a state hospital by her second husband following a drinking binge that resulted in a suicide attempt. Following this, she was diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. In 1966, Puente and her second husband got divorced. Following the divorce, Puente takes up work as a nurse's aide, a role that would see her providing care to the elderly and disabled in private homes. These people were vulnerable, and Puente exploited that fact by stealing money and possessions from them. In 1968, she got married for the 3rd time. The couple separated after 2 years. Shortly after this, Puente began to operate an unlicensed boarding house from a 3-story Victorian property she had taken over. It was located at 2100 F Street in Sacramento, just a few blocks away from the property where the murders in this case take place. Throughout the 1970s, Puente would continue to offer lodgings to the type of people who would normally struggle to get housing anywhere else. Her tenants were often destitute with mental health issues or some form of disability. She would help the residents sign up for their social security benefits. She would then have them sign over the benefits to her so she could cash the checks herself. In 1976, she gets married for the 4th time to an abusive alcoholic. This relationship lasts only a few months. Her husband files for divorce as Puente is having affairs with men that she's meeting in bars. Her drinking has increased and she started to rack up debts. He's also starting to suspect her of stealing from her tenants. In December 1978, Puente's crimes caught up with her. She was convicted of illegally cashing state and federal checks, all of which belonged to her tenants. She was put on 5 years of probation, which involved a ban on operating a boarding house, and she was ordered to pay $4,000 in reparation. Now, at 49, Puente's reputation had taken a hit. She's single and has lost her means of making money. Puente starts to dress more matron-like. She would wear modest clothes, big thick glasses and pearl necklaces. She lies about her age, adding 10 years on, and starts to speak with a quivering old lady voice. This shift in persona saw her land a job as an in-home carer. Like the work she had previously done, only this time she was trusted to care for patients in their homes. Again, Puente starts to exploit her vulnerable patients by stealing things from them. Towards the end of 1981, Puente went into business with her friend Ruth Monroe, operating a restaurant in a local tavern. The following year, Ruth would move in to 2100 F Street following the death of her husband. This is where things take a more sinister turn, because within a few weeks, Ruth becomes unwell. In the spring of '82, Ruth dies of an overdose of codeine and Tylenol. Police rule it as a suicide, but Ruth's family are convinced it was Puente's doing. In August of that year, Puente pleaded guilty to drugging and robbing a 74-year-old man she had met at a bar. She was given 5 years in prison, but only served 3. In 1985, she was released on probation for good behaviour. In addition to being banned from operating a boarding house, the terms of her probation meant that she was banned from handling other people's social security checks and working with the elderly. She was picked up from prison by her new boyfriend, Everson Gilmouth, a 77-year-old man to whom she had written letters while she was incarcerated. Puente and Gilmouth settled in Sacramento, moving into a large Victorian building, 1426 F Street. Puente opens a joint bank account in Gilmouth's name and begins to run an unlicensed boarding house from the property. This was in direct violation of her probation, but it goes unnoticed. Like her previous boarding house, Puente continues with her kindly grandma routine and begins offering lodgings to the elderly and people with addiction or mental health issues, people who had poor support networks, people that wouldn't be missed. Once again, she would help them get their benefits and then either steal their social security checks or open a joint bank account with them, withdrawing their money once it was paid in. Social workers would praise Puente for her willingness to provide homes to their clients who were proving impossible to house anywhere else. In November 1985, Puente employed a handyman to install wood flooring at the boarding home. She sells him Gilmouth's pickup truck, explains that her partner doesn't need it anymore. She also pays him to make her a storage chest to store books. The dimensions are like that of a coffin. Shortly after receiving the chest, Puente nails it shut and then asks the handyman to help her get rid of it because she doesn't need the books after all. They both travel to another county and dump the box in a river. The box was found by a fisherman in January 1986. Police are called and the remains of an elderly man are found inside. Unfortunately, police don't ID the body of Gilmouth until 1987. Puente continues to cash his checks and forges letters to his family to avoid suspicion. It's important to understand that Puente had cultivated this positive image within her community. She had donated money to the campaigns of local politicians, charities and causes. She would regularly give free food to locals and take in stray cats. She was very much seen to play the part of a kindly, trustworthy old lady. Tenants would come and go, and some would vanish unexpectedly, but no one seemed to think much of it. It was the nature of the type of people Puente housed after all. In late 1988, Judy Moyes, a social worker, raises the alarm with the police, following her concerns regarding a client she had helped gain residency at 1426 F Street. Alvaro Montoya, who went by the name Bert, was developmentally disabled and had schizophrenia and no support network. Moyes had called a few months after Bert had settled in, just to check on how he was doing. Puente kept giving her excuses as to why Bert wasn't home. Eventually, the social worker decides she's had enough and she files Bert as a missing person with the police. She also informs them that another resident had told her that Puente had been digging a lot of holes in the garden. An officer visits the boarding house to follow this up. The officer is told by Puente and all the other tenants that Bert has gone to live with his family. However, when the officer was leaving, one of the residents slipped him a note that said, "She wants me to lie to you." The officer feeds this back to his superior and they check Puente on their database and find her extensive criminal record, and the alarm bells start ringing. On Friday, the 11th of November, detectives attend the boarding house along with a parole officer. They found many bottles of different sedative drugs in the property. They notice loose soil in the back garden, and after Puente calmly agrees, the detective starts to dig, eventually discovering a human femur bone. Puente plays dumb and states that she hasn't killed anyone. She's taken in for questioning but denies everything except for breaching her probation by running the boarding house. The police stop the dig and wait till the next day when they can return with forensics to make sure that the excavation is done properly. Police don't have enough evidence to arrest Puente and she's returned to the property that night. The next day, digging continues. Puente asks if she can go to the restaurant around the corner for a cup of coffee with her nephew. She isn't under arrest, so the police officer walks her to the restaurant and then comes back to the boarding house to keep digging. Shortly after he gets back, they find bones belonging to another body. At that point, police have enough to arrest Puente, and a police officer runs to the restaurant. But Puente has done a runner. A manhunt ensues. More bodies are found, 7 in total, 6 in the back and 1 in the front garden. Police remove carpeting from a room in Puente's living quarters and find putrefied bodily fluid soaked into the wood flooring. They suspect this is Puente's kill room. 5 days after she had fled, Puente was arrested in Los Angeles. A 59-year-old man that Puente had tried to chat up in a bar the night before had recognised her from the TV and had called it in. He claimed she had gotten more friendly with him after learning he was on Social Security benefits. Slowly, police get IDs for each of the 7 bodies found. They are Betty Mae Palmer, age 78, Leona Carpenter, 78, James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 61, Dorothy Miller, 65, Alvaro Burt Montoya, 51, Benjamin Fink, 55. Puente was charged with 7 counts of murder for the 7 bodies found in her garden. She was also charged with Gilmouth and Monroe's murder. Police had linked these two to Puente after the family had informed them of their concerns. Puente admits to illegally running a boarding house, fraudulently cashing the tenants' benefit checks. She also admits to burying the bodies, but she claims that the victims had died of natural causes or had committed suicide. She claims that she buried the bodies because she didn't want authorities to find out she was running a boarding house and committing fraud again. Puente was only convicted of 3 of the 9 murders. That's for Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter and Dorothy Miller. Close to a month's worth of deliberation, the jury couldn't agree that Puente had killed the remaining 6 victims. They also deadlocked on what the penalty should be. This resulted in Puente being spared the death penalty. Instead, she received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Puente served her sentence at Central California Women's Facility until her death in 2011 at the age of 82. She maintained her innocence to the very end. Thanks for watching. If you got something from this episode, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more episodes, make sure you click subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss anything. I'm new at this, so feel free to leave a comment with your feedback, suggestions or questions. See you in the next one.